My husband of 10 years looked across our private table at an exclusive resort and told me he had found someone new. He smiled with utter confidence, expecting me to break down in front of our children. He wanted tears. He wanted me to beg. Instead, I calmly wiped my mouth, took a sip of my wine, and prepared to hand him a single yellow envelope that would absolutely dismantle his entire life. My name is Jordan. I am 34 years old and I manage wealth for highly exclusive investment funds. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe that a woman should never let a man mistake her kindness for weakness. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I made my cheating husband regret the day he ever tried to play me. The ocean breeze at Martha's Vineyard was perfect that evening. We were sitting on the private terrace of a 5-star seafood restaurant. I had rented the entire cabana for our family vacation. My 12-year-old son Trey was showing his 9-year-old sister Maya a funny video on his phone. The ambiance was flawless, paid for entirely by my hard work. I was looking forward to a relaxing evening after closing a massive corporate merger. Marcus, my husband, abruptly pushed his plate of expensive oysters away. He leaned back in his teakwood chair, adjusting the cuffs of the designer linen shirt I had bought him just last month for his birthday. He took a deep breath, looking around to make sure the kids were distracted, but speaking loud enough so they could still hear if they paid attention. "I cannot pretend anymore, Jordan," he said, his voice dripping with an unearned sense of superiority. "I am in love with Chloe. She is 26. She is vibrant. She actually sees me as a strong man, not just another line item on your endless corporate balance sheets. I want a divorce, and I want it done quickly." The sheer audacity hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Trey stopped moving immediately. Maya looked up, her large brown eyes darting anxiously between her father and me. Any normal woman might have gasped or thrown her expensive drink in his face, but my world is built on strategy and risk assessment. Panic is a useless emotion in my line of work. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I simply picked up my crisp linen napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and looked him dead in the eyes. "Is that right?" I asked, my tone as calm as the ocean waves rolling onto the sand just 50 yards away. Marcus scoffed, slamming his hand lightly on the table. "Do not do that. Do not do that cold corporate ice queen routine with me right now. This is exactly why I am leaving you. You are a machine, Jordan. You care more about your investment portfolios and your real estate acquisitions than you do about creating a traditional warm home for your family. Chloe respects me. She needs me to protect her. You just use your money to control everyone around you." He was projecting his own insecurities so loudly it was almost embarrassing to witness. For 10 long years, I had built a financial empire from the ground up to ensure our children would never have to struggle the way our ancestors did. I paid off the massive college debt Marcus had accumulated before we ever met. I funded his 3 different failed business ventures without a single complaint. I bought the sprawling estate in Buckhead where we lived like royalty. I secured the luxury penthouse in Miami that he loved to brag about to his golf buddies. I was the sole architect of the luxury he felt so incredibly entitled to. And now he was sitting at a dinner table I paid for, eating gourmet food. I paid for using my money to fund his affair with a public relations assistant. Mom, Trey whispered, his voice trembling slightly. He was old enough to understand exactly what the word divorce meant. I placed my hand gently over my son's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Finish your dinner, baby. Your father is just having a temporary lapse in cognitive function. He will be finished speaking soon." "Stop talking to my son like that," Marcus snapped, leaning forward aggressively. A few guests at nearby tables turned to look at the commotion. Marcus, always obsessed with maintaining a flawless image among the wealthy elites of our community, immediately lowered his voice. His eyes, however, were pure venom. "I am not playing games with you, Jordan," he hissed through gritted teeth. "I have already spoken to a top-tier divorce lawyer back in Atlanta. We have been married for a decade. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. I am legally entitled to half of the assets acquired during our marriage. I want half of the investment firm. I want the Buckhead estate. And I am keeping the Miami penthouse for myself. Chloe and I need a fresh start, and you are going to fund it. If you fight me on this, I will drag your pristine professional reputation through the mud. I will tell your board of directors exactly how terrible and emasculating you are to live with. The delusion was absolutely staggering. He honestly believed he held the winning hand. He thought his petty threats would intimidate me into signing over half of my empire just to keep the peace and avoid a public scandal. He thought my silence was the result of profound shock, when in reality it was pure, cold calculation. I let a small, genuine smile touch my lips. It was the smile of an apex predator watching its prey walk directly into a carefully laid trap tonight. Marcus blinked, his arrogant facade slipping for just a fraction of a second as he registered my expression. Before he could regain his composure and launch into another pathetic monologue about his needs, a sweet, sickeningly gentle voice chimed in from the other side of the table. "Jordan, honey, you really must try to see this from his perspective." It was Sarah, my brother-in-law's wife. She leaned forward, placing her pale, manicured hand gently over Marcus's forearm in a grotesque display of solidarity. Sarah was a woman who had built her entire personality around being the perfect supportive wife to Marcus's older brother, David. I slowly turned my gaze away from Marcus and focused entirely on Sarah. "Go on, Sarah," I said evenly. "I am fascinated to hear your perspective on my marriage." "Well, we all know you are incredibly driven, Jordan. Your career is astonishing. We are all so proud of you. But you have to admit you have been incredibly absent. You are always at the firm, always flying to New York or London. A man like Marcus needs a traditional home. He needs a wife who makes him feel like the head of the household. You simply out-earned his comfort level. Letting him go peacefully is the right thing to do." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the warm ocean air. Let me be perfectly clear about who Sarah was. She was currently living rent-free in a 4-bedroom luxury townhouse in Ansley Park, a townhouse that I purchased in cash 4 years ago because her husband David had bankrupted his second startup and they were facing eviction. She was currently wearing a Cartier bracelet that I had gifted her last Christmas. And yet here she was, sitting at a dinner table I paid for, eating a $500 meal. I paid for, confidently explaining why my ability to build generational wealth was a character flaw that justified my husband sleeping with a 26-year-old assistant. Out-earned his comfort level, I repeated smoothly. That is a fascinating phrase, Sarah. Are you suggesting that my ability to secure a financial future for my children is somehow an insult to his masculinity? Sarah shifted slightly, her fake smile faltering, but only for a moment. Marriages require balance, Jordan. You took away his role as the provider. He feels emasculated. And honestly, considering the emotional toll this marriage has taken on him, you owe it to him to make this transition as seamless as possible. Owe it to him, I echoed. My voice was dangerously quiet now. Yes, Sarah pushed on, emboldened by my apparent lack of resistance. She sat up straighter, her eyes gleaming with a greedy light that she could no longer hide. Marcus has sacrificed the best years of his life supporting your ambitions. He deserves a fair settlement. The Buckhead estate is too large for just you and the kids anyway. And Marcus always loved the Miami penthouse. It would be the perfect place for him and Chloe to start fresh. Plus, he will obviously need a substantial monthly spousal support payment to maintain the lifestyle he is accustomed to. I looked at Marcus. He was nodding along, with her actually looking vindicated. He had brought Sarah along on this family vacation for exactly this purpose. He lacked the spine to make these outrageous demands entirely on his own, so he had recruited his sister-in-law to act as his mouthpiece, wrapping his greed in the language of emotional healing and fairness. "So let me make sure I understand the terms being presented here," I said, leaning back and crossing my legs. "You want me to hand over a multi-million-dollar estate, a luxury beachfront penthouse, and pay monthly alimony to a man who has not held a steady job since the Obama administration, all so he can go play house with a public relations assistant who is barely older than his own niece." Marcus slammed his hand on the table again, his face turning an ugly shade of red. "Do not insult me, Jordan. I contributed to this family. I stayed home with Trey and Maya when they were toddlers so you could build your precious firm. You stayed home because you were fired from your middle management position for incompetence, and I refuse to let you waste any more of our money on foolish investments, I corrected him coldly. I paid for the full-time nanny who actually raised the children while you spent your afternoons on the golf course. Sarah interjected again, her voice losing its sweet edge and turning sharp. That is exactly the kind of financial abuse he is talking about, Jordan. You hold your money over his head like a weapon. If you do not agree to a fair split, he will take you to court. A judge will see exactly how controlling you are. Georgia law is clear on marital assets. You do not want a messy public divorce. Think of your firm. Think of your clients. They would not like to see their trusted wealth manager embroiled in a nasty, vindictive legal battle. It is better to just pay him out and let everyone move on. She looked so incredibly smug sitting there. She thought she had me completely cornered. She thought my professional reputation was my ultimate weak point, the perfect lever they could use to pry open my bank accounts. She was likely already calculating exactly how much of Marcus's divorce payout she could siphon off to fund her own failing lifestyle. Trey was glaring at his father, his jaw tight with anger. Maya looked confused and scared by the sudden tension. I gave them both a reassuring nod. Then I reached into my oversized designer tote bag, resting on the empty chair beside me. I pulled out a thick, heavy yellow manila envelope and placed it squarely in the center of the dining table. The heavy yellow envelope sat on the white linen tablecloth like a dormant explosive waiting to be detonated. Marcus stared at it for a long moment. Then a slow, condescending smirk spread across his handsome face. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together behind his head. He looked at Sarah, who was practically vibrating with excitement, and then back at me. He actually chuckled, a deep, arrogant sound that grated against the tranquil rhythm of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline nearby. You see, Sarah, this is exactly what I was talking about, Marcus said, gesturing casually toward the envelope. Jordan is nothing if not utterly predictable. She always has a contingency plan for every possible scenario. She always treats our marriage like a corporate merger that might need to be dissolved at a moment's notice. I tell her I am leaving her for a younger, more vibrant woman, and instead of showing any genuine human emotion, she pulls out a pre-drafted settlement agreement. I bet my lawyer will find that you have undervalued everything, Jordan, but I have to admit I really appreciate the efficiency. It saves us an annoying trip to a mediation room. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locked on the yellow paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket that belonged to her. Well, it is only fair, Marcus. She knows you have a rock-solid case. Georgia courts do not look kindly on spouses who try to hide assets during a messy divorce. She is just being smart. Protecting her little firm is her absolute top priority right now. I am sure she has calculated exactly how much she needs to pay to keep this situation quiet and out of the press. You just need to make sure the final number is high enough to completely secure your future. You deserve it after dealing with her emotional coldness for 10 long years. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, observing them like laboratory specimens under a powerful microscope. Go ahead, Marcus, I encouraged him softly. Tell me more about what you truly believe you deserve. Tell me about your fundamental rights. I want to hear exactly how you view the empire I built with my own 2 hands from the ground up. He unlaced his fingers and leaned forward, resting his elbows aggressively on the table. His eyes were bright with unadulterated greed and a false sense of victory. I view it as our empire, Jordan. Not yours alone. Ours. You may have been the one sitting in the corner office making the rapid trades and attending the boring board meetings, but I provided the stable foundation at home. I am the exact reason you could focus entirely on building generational wealth. I held the title of your faithful husband. That title comes with massive legal rights in this state. I am entitled to 50% of everything that has my name attached to it, and frankly, I am entitled to half of the things that only have your name on them too. The law does not care who worked the 80-hour weeks. The law only cares that we are legally bound by marriage. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the expensive red liquid before taking a very confident sip. Take the financial firm, for example. You started that firm exactly 3 years after we got married. Every single high-profile client you secured and every massive portfolio you managed happened during the span of our union. My legal team is going to aggressively calculate the current market valuation of the entire operation down to the very last penny. Then there is the luxury real estate. The Buckhead house is easily worth $4 million in today's competitive market. The Miami beachfront penthouse is worth another $2 million. We have the joint investment accounts, the luxury imported vehicles, and the contemporary art collection. I know exactly how much you are worth, Jordan, and by extension, I know exactly how much I am worth today. And do not think for one single second that you can use Chloe against me in family court, Marcus added, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face. Infidelity is practically irrelevant in a modern divorce case when there is this much money on the line. Judges see it every single day in Atlanta. A wealthy, neglectful spouse pushes her husband right into the loving arms of someone who actually cares about his well-being. It is a classic, predictable story. No judge is ever going to penalize me for finding the emotional support that you flatly refused to provide for years. In fact, your obsessive dedication to your work will likely play perfectly in my favor. It proves my point that you abandoned this marriage long before I ever found Chloe. Exactly, Sarah chimed in, taking another greedy sip of her sparkling champagne. You cannot just buy a grown man expensive designer watches and luxury cars and expect him to be truly happy, Jordan. Money does not ever replace genuine warmth and affection. Marcus is simply claiming what is rightfully his so he can finally live a truthful and authentic life. You should be actively apologizing to him right now, really. If you had just paid more attention to his emotional needs, he would not have been forced to look elsewhere for validation. But since we are here, signing this settlement agreement is the absolute least you can do. I looked over at my young son, Trey. His fists were clenched tight under the heavy wooden table. He was old enough to see right through his father's completely pathetic excuses. Maya was quietly pushing her pasta around her plate, wishing she was anywhere else. I hated that they had to witness this disgusting display of greed. Now please go ahead and open the yellow envelope, Marcus. Read the very first document aloud for us all to hear clearly tonight. Marcus did not immediately reach for the envelope. Instead, he let out a long, exasperated sigh as if I were a stubborn child refusing to understand a very simple concept. He crossed his arms over his expensive linen shirt and stared at me with a look of profound pity. "You are in such a rush to handle the paperwork, Jordan," he said, shaking his head. "But before I even look at whatever lowball offer your lawyers threw together, I need to make my absolute non-negotiable terms crystal clear. We are not going to haggle like street vendors. I am telling you what I am taking, and you are going to agree." I kept my expression perfectly blank. "Please, Marcus," I said softly. "I would hate to interrupt your moment of triumph. Outline your terms." He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. "First and foremost, I am taking the Miami penthouse, completely free and clear. I know you paid $3 million in cash for it 2 years ago, but let us be honest here. I am the one who actually uses it. You flew down there exactly twice, and both times you spent the entire weekend locked in the primary bedroom on conference calls. Chloe loves the beach. She has this incredible vision for redecorating the place to make it feel more organic and welcoming. The current minimalist design you picked out is entirely too sterile. We are going to turn it into a real home. A place where we can host friends and actually enjoy life without worrying about your fluctuating stock portfolios." Sarah nodded vigorously, her blonde hair bouncing around her shoulders. She took a sip of her champagne and pointed a finger at me. "And let us not forget about the property taxes and the monthly maintenance fees, Jordan. You will obviously need to set up a trust or a direct deposit to cover those expenses for him. It is only fair. You cannot just hand over a luxury beachfront property and expect Marcus to pay the exorbitant upkeep on his own. He is starting over. He needs a financial cushion to ensure his new lifestyle is not interrupted by trivial bills." I looked at Sarah, absorbing the sheer magnitude of her delusion. "Let me make sure I'm hearing you correctly, Sarah," I said. You want me to give my cheating husband a $3 million beachfront property, and you also want me to pay the utility bills and property taxes so his 26-year-old mistress can redecorate my living room with organic textiles. It is called spousal maintenance, Jordan. Marcus snapped, his face flushing with anger. Do not try to make it sound ridiculous. It is standard legal procedure. Right, I murmured, taking another slow sip of my wine. Please continue. You mentioned the Buckhead estate earlier. Marcus sat up straighter, clearly emboldened by my calm demeanor. He mistook my silence for submission. Yes, the Buckhead estate. I am willing to be reasonable about the house. I know you love that massive, imposing fortress. It suits your personality perfectly. I do not want to live there anymore. It is full of bad memories and cold energy. So you can keep the house. How incredibly generous of you. I replied, my voice dripping with subtle sarcasm that he completely missed. However, Marcus continued, raising a finger to silence me. Since I am graciously letting you keep the primary residence, I will require a cash buyout for exactly 50% of its current appraised value. My lawyer had a private appraiser run the numbers last week. The estate is currently valued at $4.8 million, so you owe me $2.4 million in liquid cash. I expect that wire transfer to be completed within 30 days of the divorce decree being signed. I need that capital to invest in a new business venture Chloe and I have been discussing. She has brilliant ideas for a boutique marketing agency, and I am going to be the primary angel investor. I felt a genuine laugh bubbling up in my throat, but I forced it down. He wanted my money to fund his mistress's startup. The audacity was almost magnificent in its pure stupidity. Sarah leaned in closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. And Marcus is not trying to be greedy, Jordan. He is actually leaving a lot of money on the table. He is not even asking for half of your commercial real estate portfolio or the offshore accounts. If you try to fight these very reasonable demands in court, my husband David and I will fully support Marcus. We will testify about the emotional neglect. We will tell the judge how you prioritize your clients over your own family. You will lose far more than just a penthouse and a few $1 million. You will lose your pristine public image. She smiled, a venomous little smile that made my stomach turn. I realized then that Sarah was banking on this settlement just as much as Marcus was. If Marcus walked away with millions in cash and a luxury penthouse, David and Sarah would inevitably attach themselves to him like parasites. They were probably already planning their winter vacations in Miami. I looked at my children. Trey was staring at his father with pure disgust. Maya was looking down at her lap, her small shoulders tense. They were learning a very harsh lesson about human greed tonight, but it was a lesson they needed to learn. They needed to see exactly what kind of man their father truly was before I completely dismantled him. Your terms are certainly detailed, Marcus, I said, shifting my gaze back to him. You have clearly given this a lot of thought. A beachfront penthouse, a multi-million-dollar cash buyout, and a fully funded lifestyle for your new girlfriend. It is a beautiful fantasy. It is not a fantasy, Jordan, Marcus sneered. It is the law. I gestured toward the yellow envelope resting between us. Then you should definitely open the envelope, Marcus. If the law is so firmly on your side, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. Read the first document. Let us see if your beautiful fantasy aligns with my concrete reality. Marcus rolled his eyes, letting out a loud scoff to show how utterly unbothered he was by my request. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against the heavy manila paper. He picked it up, weighing it in his hands for a brief moment. Fine, Jordan, he said, a smug smile playing on his lips. Let us read your little settlement offer. I am sure it is a masterclass in corporate negotiation. But remember what I said. My terms are strictly non-negotiable. He slid his perfectly manicured thumb under the flap of the envelope and broke the seal. He pulled out a thick stack of crisp white papers. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, practically salivating as she tried to catch a glimpse of the numbers printed on the pages. Marcus casually flipped to the first page, expecting to see a standard legal greeting and a list of asset divisions. Instead, his eyes scanned the bold black text at the very top of the page. I watched his face with intense satisfaction. The smug, arrogant smile completely vanished in a fraction of a second. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His eyes darted rapidly back and forth across the first paragraph, as if his brain was violently rejecting the information his eyes were receiving. "What is it, Marcus?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. She tried to grab the edge of the paper, but he pulled it away, his hands beginning to tremble slightly. "Is it the offer for the house? Tell me what it says." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat completely dry. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a sudden crushing panic. "This," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "This is not a divorce settlement." "No, Marcus," I replied softly, leaning forward and resting my chin on my folded hands. "It most certainly is not. Read it aloud, just like I asked." Marcus stared at the thick white paper in his trembling hands. The warm ocean breeze suddenly felt freezing cold against the tense silence at our table. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously, but his voice completely failed him. The smugness that had radiated from him just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by the raw primal terror of a man who suddenly realized he had walked directly into a heavily armed trap. Sarah slammed her champagne glass down on the table, spilling a little of the expensive liquid on the pristine white tablecloth. "Marcus, what does it say?" she demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. "Stop acting like you just saw a ghost and tell me what the settlement offer is. We need to know how much she is offering so we can counter it." "It is not an offer, Sarah," Marcus choked out finally. His eyes remained locked on the page as if looking away would make the words permanent. He looked at me pleadingly. "Jordan, please, you cannot do this. We can talk about this privately. We do not need to do this right here in front of everyone." I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands calmly in my lap. "We are doing it exactly right here, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "You wanted to make a grand spectacle of leaving me. You wanted to sit at a dinner table I paid for and demand half of the empire I built. You wanted to threaten my professional reputation. So we are going to lay all the cards on the table. Read the document out loud, or I will have the waiter bring a microphone and I will read it for you." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut for a brief second. When he opened them, he looked thoroughly defeated. He cleared his throat, which sounded like dry sandpaper. "It is a forensic accounting report." He began, his voice shaking so badly he could barely project the words. "Conducted by the Internal Auditing Division of your investment firm." Sarah frowned, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in deep confusion. "An audit?" she asked. "Why are you handing him a corporate audit, Jordan? This is a divorce proceeding, not a board meeting." "Keep reading, Marcus," I commanded, ignoring Sarah completely. "Read the executive summary." Marcus took a ragged breath. "The document states that over the past 14 months, a total of $250,000 was systematically diverted from the firm's secondary operating accounts. The funds were routed through a series of shell LLCs, registered under the name of Marcus Carter." Trey let out a quiet gasp from the other side of the table. Maya looked between us, her small hands gripping the edge of her seat. They were young, but they knew exactly what stealing meant. Sarah let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "Well, that is just a misunderstanding," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Marcus is your husband, Jordan. Spouses move money around all the time. It is marital property. You cannot audit your own husband and call it stealing. He probably just used it for household expenses or investments." "Right, Marcus. You used it for the family." Marcus did not answer her. He just stared at the table, looking like he was going to be physically sick. I turned my gaze to Sarah, pinning her with a look of absolute disgust. "He did not use it for the family." "Sarah," I explained slowly, as if speaking to a very slow child. "My firm is not a joint checking account. It is a highly regulated financial institution with strict fiduciary duties. Diverting corporate funds into personal shell companies using fabricated vendor invoices is not moving money around. It is a felony. It is textbook embezzlement. It is white-collar crime." The blood drained from Sarah's face as the gravity of the word felony hit her. She looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with shock. "Marcus, tell me she is lying," she whispered. "Tell me you did not steal from her company." Marcus finally looked up, his eyes red and watery. "I did not steal it," he pleaded desperately, looking directly at me. "Jordan, You know I would never steal from you. I just needed some liquid capital for a new business idea. I was going to pay it all back with interest as soon as the project launched. It was a bridge loan. A bridge loan, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. That is a very creative financial term for buying your 26-year-old mistress a brand new Mercedes-Benz SUV and paying for her luxury apartment lease in Midtown. Because the forensic accountants traced every single stolen dollar directly from those shell companies into Chloe's personal bank accounts. You used corporate funds to finance your affair, Marcus. You did not just cheat on me, you committed federal wire fraud to do it. The silence that followed was absolute. The sound of the clinking silverware from the other tables seemed miles away. Marcus slumped down in his teakwood chair, the document slipping from his fingers and landing back on the table. He looked completely shattered. You see, Marcus? I continued, my voice calm and conversational. You thought you had all the leverage today. You thought you could threaten me with a public divorce and demand millions of dollars because you felt emasculated. But you forgot one very important detail about who I am. I do not just manage wealth, I protect it. When I noticed the first accounting discrepancy 3 months ago, I did not confront you. I hired the best forensic investigators in Atlanta to quietly map out every single financial move you made. I let you keep stealing so the paper trail would be absolutely undeniable. You let me do it, he whispered, his voice cracking. You set me up. No, Marcus, I corrected him. I just gave you rope and you tied it around your own neck. I just gave you rope and you tied it around your own neck. Marcus stared at me as if he were looking at a complete stranger. His breathing was shallow and rapid. The crushing reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him. He reached out for his crystal water glass, but his hand was shaking so violently that he knocked it over. The ice-cold water spilled rapidly across the table, soaking into the pristine white linen and dripping steadily onto his expensive Italian leather shoes. He did not even seem to notice the mess forming in his lap. Turn to the second page of that document. Marcus, I instructed, keeping my tone dangerously even. Let us review the exact timeline of your profound financial generosity. He swallowed hard, but he did not move a single muscle. He was completely paralyzed by sheer terror. So I recited the financial details strictly from memory. My mind is a steel trap for numbers and dates, especially when they involve betrayal. On April 12th, you wired exactly $75,000 to a luxury auto dealership in Buckhead. I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the warm ocean breeze. You purchased a matte black Mercedes-Benz SUV. You registered the luxury vehicle exclusively in Chloe's name. Do you remember what else happened on April 12th, Marcus? He stared down at the spilled water on the table, refusing to meet my eyes. I leaned forward, making sure he heard every single syllable loud and clear. It was Maya's 9th birthday. While I was in the backyard setting up the decorations and coordinating the expensive caterers, you were supposedly stuck in heavy traffic, picking up her custom cake. But you were not in traffic. You were at the luxury dealership signing the final paperwork for your mistress's new car. You used the money you stole from my firm, money meant to secure our children's future, to buy a vehicle for a woman you have known for barely 6 months. Trey let out a sharp, angry breath. I saw his small fists clench even tighter under the heavy wooden table. I hated that he had to hear this, but he needed to know the absolute truth. He needed to understand the complete lack of integrity in the man sitting proudly across from us just moments ago. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes wide and desperate. Jordan, I can explain the car, he stammered, his voice cracking pitifully. It was not a personal gift. It was a company vehicle. Chloe needed reliable transportation to meet with potential high-net-worth clients for our new marketing agency. It was a legitimate business expense. I was going to transfer the title back to the LLC next quarter, once the agency became profitable. A legitimate business expense. I repeated, letting the sheer absurdity of his pathetic excuse hang heavily in the air. That is truly fascinating, Marcus. And what about the luxury apartment lease in Midtown? Is that also a vital business expense? $4,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment with a panoramic city skyline view. You paid 6 months upfront in cash. The wire transfer was executed on June 4th. The exact same day you told me you were flying to Chicago for a weekend networking conference. He had absolutely nothing to say. His carefully constructed lies were laid entirely bare, stripped of their thin veneer of justification. You thought you were so incredibly clever, I continued relentlessly. You set up those shell companies thinking my accounting department would not notice a few extra invoices slipping through the cracks. But my firm manages billions of dollars, Marcus. We have elite internal auditors who spot everything. When they flagged the suspicious outward transfers, they brought them directly to my desk. I could have fired you immediately. I could have called the police and had you escorted out of our neighborhood in handcuffs. If you knew he was actively stealing months ago, why did you let him keep doing it? Sarah blurted out, her eyes darting nervously between us. Why bring us all the way to this expensive island resort just to ambush him today? Because I needed a bulletproof legal case, I answered, not breaking eye contact with my terrified husband. If I confronted him over a single missing $50,000, he would have played the ultimate victim. He would have dragged out the divorce, played heavily on my sympathies, and tried to convince the family court that I was simply a bitter breadwinner. By letting him steal $250,000, I ensured his actions firmly crossed into major felony fraud. I gathered enough undeniable evidence to completely destroy any leverage he thought he had. Marcus buried his face in his shaking hands. A low, pathetic sob escaped his throat. The arrogant, demanding husband from 10 minutes ago was entirely gone. In his place was a terrified, broken man who had just realized he had gambled his entire life away on a childish fantasy. "You cannot take this to the police, Jordan," he begged, his voice muffled by his hands. "Please, I will get the money back. I will force her to sell the car. I will cancel the apartment lease tomorrow. I will drain my personal savings to repay the firm. Just do not press criminal charges. If you go to the authorities, I will go to federal prison. Our children cannot have a father sitting in a prison cell. Do not dare use our children as a shield to protect you from the consequences of your own crimes." I snapped, my voice finally radiating absolute authority. You did not think about your children when you were wiring their rightful inheritance to a public relations assistant. You did not think about them when you sat at this dinner table and arrogantly demanded my beachfront penthouse. I reached across the table and tapped the thick yellow envelope with my index finger. The embezzlement report is just the first document, Marcus. We have barely scratched the surface of your brand new reality. Now pull out the second document. Let us talk about that Miami penthouse you want to redecorate. Marcus stared at the yellow envelope as if it contained a live, venomous snake. His hands were still trembling so violently that the thick paper rattled when he finally reached inside to pull out the second document. He wiped his sweaty palms on his expensive linen trousers, leaving dark, damp stains on the fabric. He was no longer the arrogant husband demanding his fair share. He was a terrified man waiting for the executioner to drop the axe. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her earlier confidence completely shattered. Her eyes were wide and desperate as she tried to scan the legal jargon on the thick white parchment. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet cabana. He blinked rapidly, trying to focus his tear-filled eyes on the bold black letters printed at the very top of the page. It was a certified property deed stamped with the official seal of Miami-Dade County. But the names listed on the ownership line did not make any sense to him. He read the sentence twice and then a third time, his jaw dropping slightly. He looked up at me, completely bewildered. "Jordan, what is this?" he asked, his voice trembling. "This is the deed to the beachfront property, but my name is nowhere on it." "Read the named owner, Marcus," I said calmly, resting my hands on the table. "Read it loud enough for your sister-in-law to hear, since she was so eager to help you plan your new interior design strategy." Marcus cleared his throat, but the sound was weak and pathetic. "The property is currently owned by the Carter Heritage Irrevocable Trust." He read, his voice cracking on the final word. He looked at me, his face twisted in utter confusion. "What is the Carter Heritage Irrevocable Trust? I have never even heard of that entity." I smiled, a small, tight smile that held absolutely zero warmth. "I am not surprised you have never heard of it," I replied smoothly. You were far too busy playing golf and entertaining your young assistant to notice what I was doing with our financial portfolio. I established that trust exactly 2 years ago. I transferred the total ownership of the Miami penthouse directly into it. Do you know who the sole beneficiaries of an irrevocable trust are, Marcus? He stared at me blankly, the panic in his eyes growing more frantic by the second. I turned my gaze to my two beautiful children sitting quietly at the table. Trey and Maya are the sole beneficiaries, I explained, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. The penthouse belongs entirely to them. It is managed by an independent third-party trustee until they turn 25 years old. I do not own it, and you certainly do not own it. We have absolutely no legal claim to that property whatsoever. It is completely shielded from any divorce proceedings, civil lawsuits, or bankruptcy filings. It is totally untouchable. Sarah gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. You gave away a $3 million asset, she shrieked, her voice echoing across the outdoor terrace. You cannot just give away marital property without his consent, Jordan. That is illegal. A judge will reverse that transfer immediately. I turned a cold, dead glare towards Sarah, silencing her instantly. I purchased that property using funds from an inheritance left to me by my late grandfather, I stated coldly. Under Georgia state law, inheritance money is strictly considered separate property unless it is commingled with joint assets. I never commingled those funds. I bought the penthouse in cash under my own LLC and then legally gifted it to my children's trust fund. It was entirely legal. My corporate attorneys ensured the paperwork was absolutely flawless. No judge in this country can reverse an irrevocable trust designed to protect minors. Marcus let out a sound that was half gasp and half sob. He dropped the deed onto the table, burying his face in his hands again. His grand vision of a luxurious beachfront lifestyle with his young mistress evaporated into thin air right in front of his eyes. There would be no romantic sunsets on the balcony. There would be no organic textiles or modern renovations. The property he planned to use as his bachelor pad belonged to the very children he was so willing to abandon. You planned this, he whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. You knew this day was coming. I did not know you were going to cheat on me, Marcus, I replied honestly. But I am a wealth manager. My entire career is built on anticipating worst-case scenarios and protecting my clients' assets from catastrophic losses. You proved yourself to be financially irresponsible long before you ever met Chloe. I simply took the necessary steps to ensure your chronic incompetence would never bankrupt our children. I secured their generational wealth. You locked me out of everything, he cried, lifting his head. How am I supposed to live, Jordan? How am I supposed to start over with nothing? I do not have a career. You cannot just leave me destitute. I tilted my head, studying him with mild amusement. You are a grown man who demanded a divorce just 30 minutes ago, I reminded him. You wanted to be the strong provider for a younger woman. Now is your perfect opportunity to prove exactly how strong you are. Go out into the real world and provide, Marcus. Get a job. Start at the bottom. But you will not be funding your midlife crisis with my money or our children's inheritance. Sarah slumped back in her chair, looking physically ill. She had banked everything on Marcus securing a massive payout. Now pull out the third document, Marcus, I commanded softly, breaking the heavy silence. Because Sarah has been awfully quiet lately, and I believe it is finally her turn to fully face the music here tonight with us. Because Sarah has been awfully quiet lately, and I believe it is finally her turn to fully face the music here tonight with us. Sarah jolted in her seat as if she had just been struck by a physical blow. She looked wildly from me to Marcus and back again, her face a mask of sudden sheer panic. What are you talking about, Jordan? She stammered, her voice tight and defensive. I have absolutely nothing to do with any of this. I just came on this family vacation to support my brother-in-law during a difficult emotional transition. I am just a neutral observer trying to keep the peace. A neutral observer, I repeated, my voice dripping with cold derision. That is an incredibly creative way to describe a woman who actively facilitated a federal crime just so she could skim some cash off the top of a divorce settlement. I did not break eye contact with her as I spoke. I watched every single muscle in her face tighten with raw fear. Sarah gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table, her knuckles turning completely white. "You are crazy," she hissed, attempting to project an air of righteous indignation that fell completely flat. "David will not stand for this. I am going to call my husband right now and tell him you are threatening me." She reached for her designer purse, but my voice stopped her cold. "You should definitely call David," I agreed, nodding slowly. "In fact, he is going to want to hear exactly what is printed on the third document inside that yellow envelope. So please, Marcus, pull it out. Let us show Sarah exactly how neutral she has been over the past 6 months." Marcus, still looking entirely shattered, slowly reached back into the envelope. He pulled out a slightly thinner stack of papers and dropped them onto the table. They were not official legal documents or forensic accounting reports. They were printed screenshots, hundreds of them. Clear, high-resolution images of text messages, emails, and direct messages. Sarah let out a sharp, strangled gasp. Her eyes darted toward the papers and the last remnants of color completely drained from her face. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. The problem with using corporate funds to finance an affair, Sarah, is that it leaves a massive digital footprint. And when my forensic investigators started pulling the metadata from Marcus's phone and email accounts, they did not just find his communications with Chloe. They found his extensive, very detailed communications with you. Sarah pressed her back hard against her chair as if she were trying to merge with the wood to escape the reality of the situation. "I do not know what you think you found," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the ocean waves. "Let us read a few highlights, shall we?" I suggested, ignoring her pathetic denial. I tapped the top page of the stack. "On July 14th, you texted Marcus the contact information for a highly aggressive divorce attorney in Atlanta. You explicitly told him to make sure he demanded half of my commercial real estate portfolio because, quote, Jordan is too obsessed with her public image to let this go to a messy trial, unquote. You then asked him to promise you a 20% cut of his final cash settlement, so you and David could finally pay off the secondary mortgage on the townhouse I bought for you." Marcus closed his eyes, unable to bear the weight of his own profound stupidity. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. "But that is not even the most interesting part." I continued, my voice rising slightly to ensure the neighboring tables could not hear, but Sarah felt every single syllable. "My personal favorite is the email exchange from August 2nd. Marcus was complaining that Chloe was getting impatient and wanted him to leave me sooner. You advised him to wait until after my firm closed the massive tech merger in September, so my net worth would be significantly higher when he filed the papers. You told him to keep me completely distracted with family vacations and fake affection while he moved the embezzled money into the shell accounts. You literally gave him step-by-step instructions on how to drain my assets while pretending to be a loving husband." I paused, letting the absolute silence of the cabana amplify the crushing weight of her betrayal. "You did not just know about the affair, Sarah. You were the project manager. You orchestrated this entire pathetic scheme because you were tired of living in my shadow and wanted a quick payday. You sold out your own family for a 20% cut of a settlement that never actually existed." Sarah burst into sudden, frantic tears. It was a pathetic display. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. "Jordan, please, you have to understand," she wailed, her voice muffled by her fingers. "We are drowning in debt. David's business is failing again. We are going to lose everything. I was just trying to secure a future for my family. I was desperate. I am so incredibly sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "You were not trying to secure a future for your family," I corrected her, my voice ice cold. "You were trying to steal mine. You sat at my dinner table, accepted my expensive gifts, and smiled to my face while you actively plotted to destroy my life and steal my children's inheritance. You are not sorry you hurt me, Sarah. You are only crying right now because you got caught and you realize there is absolutely no money coming your way." I looked at Marcus, who was still staring blankly at the spilled water on the table. "And you, Marcus," I said, my voice filled with profound disgust. "You actually thought she was helping you because she cared about your happiness. She was using you as a pawn to get her hands on my money. You destroyed your marriage, your career, and your relationship with your children for a woman who was just using you as an ATM and a sister-in-law who was treating you like a lottery ticket." Sarah continued to sob, rocking back and forth in her chair. "What are you going to do?" she choked out, looking at me with terrified, tear-filled eyes. "Please do not show those messages to David. He will leave me. He will take the kids. He has no idea I did any of this. Please, Jordan, I am begging you." I looked at the woman who had spent the last hour demanding I hand over a $3 million penthouse to my cheating husband. I felt absolutely no pity for her, only a deep, satisfying sense of absolute control. "What I am going to do, Sarah," I said, slowly, picking up my wine glass and taking a final triumphant sip, "is make sure that every single person in our family knows exactly who you truly are. But before we get to David, we still have one more piece of business to conclude with Marcus, because he still seems to think he has legal rights to my empire." So Marcus pulled out the final document from the envelope. "Let us officially end this completely pathetic delusion right now." Marcus hesitated, his hand hovering over the yellow envelope as if it were burning hot. He had already lost his beach house, his dignity, and his freedom. He knew whatever was left inside that envelope was designed to completely obliterate him. But the silence in the cabana was suffocating. Sarah was still quietly sobbing into her hands, and the children were watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. With a heavy, defeated sigh, Marcus reached in and pulled out the last remaining stack of papers. It was bound in a thick blue legal folder. He stared at the cover, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. "This is from 10 years ago," he said, his voice raspy and incredibly weak. "This is our prenuptial agreement." He looked up at me, a sudden desperate spark of defiance igniting in his red-rimmed eyes. He thought he had finally found a loophole. "A prenuptial agreement, Jordan," he scoffed, shaking his head. "You really are grasping at straws now. We signed this before you even started your wealth management firm. It only protects the small savings account you had back then. It does not cover the Buckhead estate or the commercial properties we acquired while we were legally married. Any decent lawyer in Atlanta will tell you that assets generated during the marriage are subject to equitable distribution regardless of a 10-year-old piece of paper. You might be able to lock away the penthouse, and you might try to scare me with the embezzlement charges, but I am still legally entitled to half of the marital estate." I let him finish his pathetic little speech. It was truly fascinating to watch him try to salvage his shattered ego by pretending he understood contract law better than a woman who negotiated billion-dollar corporate acquisitions for a living. Turn to page 14. Marcus Y. instructed, calmly leaning back in my chair and crossing my ankles. "Read section 4, clause B." Marcus narrowed his eyes, but he flipped through the thick legal document. He found the page and began scanning the dense paragraphs. I watched his eyes track back and forth across the page. I watched the brief spark of defiance completely extinguish itself. 10 years ago, when I asked you to sign that agreement, you were so eager to prove you loved me for my mind and not my potential wealth. I explained, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. You barely even read the document before you signed your name on the dotted line. You just wanted to secure your place in my life. But my lawyers read it very carefully. They drafted a highly specific lifestyle clause designed entirely to protect my future assets from your potential poor decisions. Marcus was gripping the edges of the blue folder so tightly his knuckles were completely white. His mouth hung open slightly as he read the words over and over again. Section 4, Clause B, is an absolute infidelity clause, I stated clearly, making sure Sarah heard every single word as well. It stipulates that if either party engages in an extramarital affair, and that affair can be proven with documented evidence, the offending party immediately forfeits any and all rights to spousal support alimony and any share of the marital assets acquired during the union. The cheating spouse walks away with exactly what they brought into the marriage: I paused, letting the absolute finality of that statement sink into the heavy ocean air. Do you remember what you brought into this marriage, Marcus? I asked softly. You brought $80,000 in student loan debt and a leased sedan. I paid off your debt and I returned your leased car. So, according to the legally binding contract you signed 10 years ago, you are leaving this marriage with absolutely nothing. You cannot enforce this, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking completely. He looked terrified. Courts throw out prenuptial agreements all the time. It is unconscionable to leave a spouse totally destitute after 10 years. Courts throw out poorly drafted agreements. I corrected him smoothly. But this document was drafted by the finest contract lawyers in the state of Georgia, and it is not unconscionable to enforce a penalty clause that you actively triggered by committing adultery and stealing corporate funds. We have the financial trail proving you bought your mistress a luxury car. We have the text messages from Sarah explicitly discussing your ongoing affair. The evidence of your infidelity is absolutely undeniable. Therefore, the penalty clause is automatically activated. Sarah let out a pathetic whimper from across the table. She finally understood the complete devastation of her situation. She had actively helped Marcus hide his affair so she could get a 20% cut of his massive divorce settlement. But there was no settlement. Marcus was not getting a single dime from my empire. He was getting zero, and 20% of zero is exactly zero. She had destroyed her relationship with my family and implicated herself in a major corporate fraud scheme for absolutely nothing. I am taking the Buckhead estate. I continued, my voice ringing with total authority. I am taking the firm. I am taking the investment portfolios and the commercial real estate. You are not getting half of anything, Marcus. You are not even getting a fraction of a percent. You are walking away from this table with the clothes on your back and the crushing weight of a federal embezzlement charge hanging directly over your head. Marcus dropped the blue folder onto the table as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. He slumped forward, burying his face in his arms. He began to weep loudly. It was an ugly, desperate sound, the sound of a man who had flown entirely too close to the sun. You planned every single detail of this. He sobbed, his voice muffled. You let me demand the penthouse. You let me threaten you. I watched his shoulders shake with absolute cold indifference. The sound of his pathetic weeping was the only noise at our table, until a bright, cheerful voice suddenly pierced through the heavy tension. Babe, I know I am early, but I just could not wait any longer at the hotel bar. I slowly turned my head toward the entrance of the private terrace. Walking toward us with the unearned confidence of a woman who believed she had just won the lottery was Chloe. She looked exactly like the cliché Marcus had described. She was 26 years old, wearing a very tightly fitted designer silk dress that left very little to the imagination, and a pair of strappy heels that clicked loudly against the wooden deck. Her blonde hair was styled in loose beach waves, and massive designer sunglasses rested on top of her head. She was carrying a shopping bag from an exclusive boutique in the resort lobby, clearly already spending the money she thought Marcus had secured. She stopped dead in her tracks when she finally registered the scene in front of her. She looked at Marcus, who was sobbing uncontrollably into his arms. She looked at Sarah, who was pale and shivering in her seat. Then she looked at me, sitting perfectly upright, with a half-empty glass of expensive red wine in my hand. What is going on here? Chloe demanded, her cheerful demeanor instantly vanishing, replaced by a sharp, defensive glare. She marched right up to Marcus and placed a manicured hand on his shaking shoulder. Marcus, baby, what did she do to you? Marcus flinched at her touch, as if she had burned him. He did not lift his head. He just continued to weep, the crushing reality of his total ruin entirely consuming him. I took a slow sip of my wine, observing her with mild fascination. It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Chloe, I said, my voice perfectly polite and even. Marcus has told me so much about your vibrant energy and your deep appreciation for my financial resources. Chloe glared at me, her eyes flashing with anger. She genuinely thought I was the villain in this story. Do not talk to me like that, she snapped, stepping closer to the table and putting her hands on her hips. I know exactly who you are, Jordan. Marcus told me everything about how cold and controlling you are. You treat him like a prisoner. Well, those days are officially over. He loves me, and we are building a real life together. A life filled with actual warmth and affection. Actual warmth and affection, I repeated, nodding thoughtfully. That sounds lovely. Tell me Chloe does. That real life include the matte black Mercedes-Benz SUV parked in Midtown Atlanta, or the luxury beachfront penthouse in Miami that you were planning to redecorate with organic textiles. Chloe lifted her chin, a smug smile returning to her lips. She thought my question meant I had surrendered. Yes, it does, she replied proudly. He told me about the settlement terms. It is only fair, Jordan. He gave you the best years of his life while you ignored him to focus on your little finance firm. He deserves half of everything. You can try to bully him with your lawyers, but we are not backing down. We are taking the penthouse and the cash buyout. We are starting a boutique public relations agency, and you are going to fund it. It is the least you can do after ruining his self-esteem for a decade. Sarah let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. She looked up at Chloe with pure venom in her eyes. You stupid little girl. Sarah spat, her voice shaking with rage. There is no settlement. There is no penthouse. There is no money for your fake marketing agency. He is broke. Chloe blinked, looking at Sarah in confusion. Excuse me, she said haughtily. Who are you exactly? I am the sister-in-law who helped him hide your pathetic affair, Sarah yelled, slamming her hand on the table. And I am telling you right now that you ruined everything. Jordan is taking it all. She had him sign an infidelity clause 10 years ago. He gets nothing. Nothing. The smug smile slid right off Chloe's face. She looked down at Marcus, who was still hiding his face in his arms, refusing to look at her. Marcus, she said, her voice losing its arrogant edge. Marcus, tell me she is lying. Tell me you got the settlement agreement signed. Marcus slowly lifted his head. His face was red and swollen, his eyes bloodshot and terrified. I have nothing, Chloe, he whispered, his voice breaking. She knew everything. She knew about the car. She knew about the apartment. She brought the forensic auditors into it. They tracked the money. I am facing federal embezzlement charges. I am completely ruined. Chloe took a physical step back away from Marcus, as if his sudden poverty and legal trouble were a highly contagious disease. Her eyes darted wildly around the table, landing on the thick yellow envelope and the blue legal folders scattered across the white linen. Embezzlement. She stammered, her voice rising in pitch. What do you mean, embezzlement? You told me that money was from your personal investment returns. You told me you were a successful angel investor. He is an unemployed middle manager who used corporate fraud to buy your affection, I clarified smoothly. And now he is entirely destitute. Which brings us to a very interesting crossroad, Chloe. Because while Marcus is about to face the federal authorities, you and I have some urgent professional matters to discuss regarding your employment status. Chloe frowned, her confusion momentarily overriding her panic. My employment status, she echoed. What does my job have to do with any of this? I work for a private firm. You have no power over me. You work for Apex Public Relations? I said smoothly, picking up my wine glass again. A boutique marketing agency located in the prestigious Buckhead Business District. You were hired 14 months ago as a junior account executive and recently promoted to senior assistant under the direct supervision of the managing partner. Chloe crossed her arms, her designer shopping bag swinging slightly against her hip. Yes, that is exactly right, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. And the managing partner loves me. I bring in fresh organic ideas. My career has absolutely nothing to do with your crumbling marriage. You cannot just call my boss and get me fired out of jealousy, Jordan. It does not work that way in the real corporate world. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was the kind of laugh that usually made junior analysts at my firm visibly sweat. You really are wonderfully naive, Chloe. You see, you fundamentally misunderstand how wealth management at my level actually operates. My firm does not just trade stocks and bonds. We acquire controlling interests in highly profitable privately owned companies across Atlanta. We provide the silent capital that allows agencies like Apex to afford their expensive office spaces and luxurious corporate retreats. Chloe's defiant posture faltered slightly. Her arms uncrossed and she looked at me with a sudden dawning apprehension. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice losing a significant amount of its previous volume. "I am saying that exactly 3 years ago, my investment group purchased a 65% majority ownership stake in Apex Public Relations." I explained, leaning forward and placing my wine glass deliberately on the table. "I am the silent majority owner, your beloved managing partner. The man who tells you how brilliant and fresh your ideas are reports directly to my executive board every single quarter. I own the building you work in. I sign the checks that pay your salary. I am, for all intents and purposes, the ultimate authority over your entire professional existence." The color rapidly drained from Chloe's face. The arrogant mistress who had strutted onto the terrace minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by a terrified young woman who suddenly realized she had been sleeping with the husband of her Apex employer. She looked down at Marcus, who was still weeping pathetic tears into his folded arms, offering her absolutely no protection or comfort. "You cannot fire me for dating him," Chloe stammered, taking another step back. Her voice was shaking now. "That is wrongful termination. It is my personal life. It is entirely illegal for you to retaliate against me professionally just because I fell in love with your husband. If you had simply slept with my husband, I would not care about your employment status." I corrected her, my tone absolutely lethal and entirely devoid of any sympathy. "But you did not just sleep with him, Chloe. You knowingly accepted luxury gifts, including a $75,000 vehicle and a highly expensive apartment lease purchased with funds that were actively embezzled from my primary financial institution. Those stolen funds are directly tied to the parent company that owns your agency." Sarah let out a sharp gasp from across the table, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of the trap I had sprung. I ignored her entirely and kept my gaze locked on the trembling 26-year-old. "According to the strict corporate ethics policy you signed on your very first day of employment, accepting stolen financial assets connected to the firm constitutes a massive conflict of interest and a severe ethical violation," I stated, reciting the legal framework with absolute precision. "It makes you an active liability to the company. It compromises the integrity of our client relationships. Therefore, this is not personal retaliation. This is a purely administrative execution." Chloe opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wide with sheer panic. She dropped her expensive boutique shopping bag onto the wooden deck. The reality of her situation was suffocating her. She was losing her wealthy boyfriend, her luxury apartment, her designer car, and her entire career, all in the span of 5 incredibly devastating minutes. "Effective immediately, your employment at Apex Public Relations is permanently terminated," I announced, my voice echoing with finality across the private terrace. "You are officially stripped of all corporate access. You will not return to the Buckhead office tomorrow morning. If you attempt to enter the building, security will escort you off the premises immediately. You will surrender your company-issued laptop, your corporate smartphone, and your security badge to the front desk by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Please," Chloe whispered, hot tears finally spilling over her heavily mascaraed eyelashes. The bold, vibrant energy she had proudly weaponized against me was entirely shattered. "Please, Jordan. I have student loans. I have credit card debt. If I lose this job, I will be completely ruined. I cannot afford to live in Atlanta without my salary. I will give the car back. I will break the apartment lease. Just please do not take my career away." "Your career is already gone," I replied coldly, refusing to offer her even a sliver of mercy. "And when the federal investigators begin auditing Marcus's shell companies, they are going to subpoena your personal bank records. I highly suggest you use whatever little savings you have left to hire a very competent criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one when the authorities ask exactly what you knew about the embezzled funds." Chloe let out a devastating sob, burying her face in her hands exactly like the pathetic man she claimed to love so deeply. They were a perfect match. two incredibly greedy, deeply foolish people who thought they could outsmart a woman who built empires for a living. I watched them both cry, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of justified victory. But the evening was not quite over yet. I looked past the weeping mistress and the shattered husband, directing my attention toward the entrance of the restaurant terrace. A tall, sharply dressed man with a deeply confused expression was speaking to the hostess, scanning the tables. It was David Marcus's older brother and Sarah's husband. He had just arrived from his late flight from Atlanta. I smiled warmly, preparing the final devastating blow. The destruction of this toxic family was reaching its ultimate conclusion. David stepped onto the terrace looking entirely out of place in his rumpled travel suit. He was carrying a small leather duffel bag slung over one shoulder, clearly having driven straight from the regional airport. He paused, taking in the bizarre tableau before him. Marcus was slumped over the table, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Chloe was standing frozen nearby, her face streaked with tears, and her expensive shopping bag abandoned on the deck. Sarah was sitting rigid in her chair, gripping the edge of the table as if bracing for a physical impact. David's brow furrowed in deep confusion as he walked toward our table. He looked exhausted. He had been struggling for years to keep his latest tech venture afloat, constantly traveling to pitch meetings that rarely yielded results. "What is going on here?" he asked, his voice laced with concern and fatigue. "Marcus, why are you crying? Who is this young woman?" He looked at Sarah, who was suddenly unable to meet his eyes. "Sarah, you told me on the phone this morning that you were all having a relaxing family vacation. Why does everyone look like someone just died?" I remained seated, but I offered David a polite nod. "Hello, David," I said, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. "I apologize for the unexpected reception. It seems your wife was slightly premature in declaring this a relaxing family vacation. The truth is, we have been dealing with some severe corporate and marital restructuring this evening." David frowned, looking from me to his weeping brother. "Corporate restructuring," he repeated. "Jordan, what are you talking about? You manage billion-dollar funds. Why are you restructuring on a family trip?" "Because your brother decided that tonight was the perfect time to demand a divorce and attempt to claim half of my corporate assets," I explained simply. He also introduced us to Chloe. I gestured toward the terrified 26-year-old. "She was his mistress until about 10 minutes ago. Now she is just an unemployed young woman facing potential implication in a federal embezzlement investigation." David dropped his leather duffel bag onto the deck with a heavy thud. He stared at Marcus, his eyes wide with absolute shock. "You demanded a divorce?" he asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "You demanded half of her assets. Marcus, are you completely insane? Jordan has funded your entire lifestyle for a decade. She kept my company from going under 3 separate times. She bought the townhouse we live in. Why would you ever try to bite the hand that literally feeds all of us?" Marcus did not lift his head. He just let out a pathetic moan, burying his face deeper into his arms. "He thought he had leverage," I answered for him. "He thought he had outsmarted me. But more importantly, David, he thought he had the absolute unwavering support of his loyal family." I reached across the table and picked up the stack of printed screenshots. I tapped the edges against the table, aligning the pages perfectly. "Or more specifically, the support of your wife." Sarah finally moved. She shot up from her chair scraping violently against the wooden deck. "David, do not listen to her," she cried out, her voice shrill and panicked. "She is lying. She is just trying to deflect because she is a cold, heartless workaholic who drove Marcus away. She is trying to turn our family against each other." I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and utterly unhurried. "I am not trying to turn anyone against each other, Sarah," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming. "I am simply presenting the verified forensic data." I held out the stack of printed text messages and emails toward David. David looked at the papers and then at his wife. Sarah was shaking her head frantically, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "Do not read them, David," she pleaded. "Please, it is fake. She fabricated everything." David ignored her. He took the stack of papers from my hand. He adjusted his glasses and began to read the highlighted sections. The silence on the terrace returned thick and incredibly heavy. The only sound was the rustling of the pages as David flipped through the undeniable evidence of his wife's betrayal. I watched David's face closely. I watched the exhaustion vanish completely, replaced by a cold, rigid fury. He read the text message where Sarah advised Marcus on which divorce lawyer to hire. He read the email where she instructed Marcus to wait until my firm closed a major deal so his payout would be larger. And finally, he read the specific message where Sarah explicitly demanded a 20% cut of the final cash settlement to pay off the mortgage on the house that I owned. David slowly lowered the papers. He did not yell. He did not throw a tantrum like his brother. He simply looked at Sarah with an expression of profound, absolute disgust. A 20% cut, he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. You orchestrated the destruction of my brother's marriage and aided in the theft of $250,000 from the woman who kept a roof over our heads for a 20% cut. Sarah took a step toward him, reaching out her shaking hands. David, I was doing it for us, she sobbed. Your business is failing again. The creditors keep calling. We are going to lose the townhouse. I was desperate. I just wanted to make sure we were financially secure. I was trying to protect our family. You were trying to steal from the only person who actually helped our family. David corrected her, stepping backward to avoid her touch. He looked at the printed papers in his hand, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. You sat at my dining table and complained about how much Jordan worked. You judged her for not being a traditional wife. And all this time you were actively plotting to rob her blind. You used my brother's stupidity to line your own pockets. He turned toward Marcus, who was finally lifting his tear-stained face from the table. And you, David spat, pointing a finger at his brother. You are a pathetic excuse for a man. You had everything handed to you on a silver platter and you threw it all away for a cheap affair and a quick payout. You deserve every single thing that is about to happen to you. David looked back at me. I could see the shame burning in his eyes. He knew he had benefited from my wealth for years, and he knew his wife had completely destroyed any goodwill that remained between us. I am so sorry, Jordan, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I had absolutely no idea she was doing this. If I had known, I would have stopped it immediately. I believe you, David, I replied calmly. You are a terrible businessman, but you are not a thief. However, your wife's actions have fundamentally, permanently altered the financial dynamics of this family. I reached back into my tote bag and pulled out 2 final white envelopes. The time for discussion was officially over. It was time to execute the final phase of my strategic departure. I slid the 2 crisp, white envelopes across the linen tablecloth, letting them come to rest directly in front of Marcus and Sarah. Unlike the thick yellow envelope that had contained their financial ruin, these were standard business envelopes, slim and unassuming. But their impact was about to be far more immediate. Marcus stared at the envelope addressed to him, his bloodshot eyes widening with a fresh wave of panic. He did not reach for it. He looked like a man who had just been asked to stick his hand into a dark hole, knowing full well a trap was waiting inside. What is this, Jordan? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Have you not done enough tonight? Have you not humiliated me enough? Humiliation is a byproduct of your own actions, Marcus. I replied, my tone calm and entirely unsympathetic. I am merely handling the administrative fallout. Open the envelope, it is highly time-sensitive. Sarah let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, clutching her own envelope against her chest without opening it. She is kicking us out, she yelled, her voice suddenly piercingly loud. She wants us to leave the resort. Fine, I want to leave anyway. This entire trip was a mistake. Come on, David, we are leaving. She stood up, grabbing her designer purse. Sit down, Sarah. David commanded, his voice low but completely rigid with anger. He did not move a muscle. You are not going anywhere until you open that envelope, and we see exactly what else you have managed to destroy. Sarah froze, her face pale and drawn. She looked around the cabana, realizing she had absolutely nowhere to run. Slowly, with shaking hands, she tore open the flap of the white envelope. Marcus, mirroring her movements, finally opened his as well. I watched as they both unfolded the single sheet of paper contained inside. The reaction was almost instantaneous. Sarah let out a loud, dramatic gasp, dropping the paper onto the table as if it had burned her fingers. Marcus, however, completely unraveled. He read the words, and then he let out a guttural, desperate sound that echoed across the entire restaurant terrace. "No," he shouted, slamming both fists onto the table, causing the silverware to rattle loudly. "You cannot do this! You have no legal right to do this!" "What does it say?" David asked, stepping forward and picking up the paper Sarah had dropped. He scanned the document, his expression tightening. "It is an eviction notice," he stated, looking up at me in surprise. "A formal 24-hour notice to vacate the townhouse in Annesley Park." "That is correct," I confirmed, nodding smoothly. "The townhouse is wholly owned by one of my secondary holding companies. Sarah and David have been living there under a month-to-month lease agreement, which I generously set at $0 for the past 4 years. However, due to recent profound breaches of trust, I am terminating that agreement immediately. The property managers will arrive at noon tomorrow to change the locks." Sarah lost her mind. She threw her designer purse onto the deck and lunged across the table, her hands reaching toward me like claws. "You ungrateful witch!" she screamed, her voice shrill and entirely unhinged. Several guests at the nearby tables stood up, alarmed by the sudden violence of her outburst. A waiter rushed over, looking panicked. "Everything is fine," I assured the waiter, holding up a hand to stop him from intervening. "We are just wrapping up a difficult family discussion." Sarah was not fine. "You cannot kick me out of my house," she shrieked, spittle flying from her lips. "I decorated that house. It is my home. You have billions of dollars. You do not even need that townhouse. You are just being vindictive and cruel because your husband finally realized he hates you." David grabbed Sarah by the arm, pulling her roughly back away from the table. "Stop talking," he barked, giving her a sharp shake. "Stop embarrassing yourself. It is not your house, Sarah. It never was. You lied to me. You stole from my family. We are packing our bags tonight and we are leaving." "I am not leaving," Sarah sobbed, struggling against his grip. "We have nowhere to go, David. We have no money." "Then we will figure it out," he replied coldly, dragging her toward the entrance of the cabana. "But we are not staying here, and we are not staying in her house." He turned back to me, offering one final apologetic nod before physically hauling his hysterical wife off the terrace. Her shrieks faded into the distance as they disappeared into the resort lobby. Marcus watched them leave, his eyes wide with absolute despair. He looked down at his own eviction notice. "You are kicking me out of the Buckhead estate," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You want me out by tomorrow. Jordan, I live there. All my things are there. Your things will be packed by a professional moving crew and placed in a secure storage unit." I informed him, my voice remaining perfectly steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "The storage unit is paid for the next 30 days. After that, you will need to assume the financial responsibility for your possessions." "You demanded a fresh start, Marcus. I am simply expediting the process." Marcus completely broke down. The carefully curated image he had spent 10 years building, the image of the wealthy, successful businessman, the devoted family man, the powerful patriarch, it all shattered right there on the wooden deck of the Martha's Vineyard Resort. He sank to his knees, the expensive linen trousers pooling around his legs. He reached out, grabbing the edge of the tablecloth. "Please, Jordan," he begged, his voice loud and desperate, carrying across the entire restaurant. "I am so sorry. I was stupid. I was completely brainwashed. I do not love her." He gestured wildly toward Chloe, who was still standing frozen nearby. "She means absolutely nothing to me. I love you. I love our family. Please do not throw me away like this." The surrounding tables had fallen completely silent. Everyone was watching the wealthy, elegant man sobbing on his knees, begging his calm, perfectly composed wife for mercy. The social elite of Atlanta who frequented this resort were witnessing the absolute destruction of Marcus Carter. By tomorrow morning, the entire country club circuit would know exactly what had happened here tonight. Chloe let out a sharp, disgusted sound. You spineless, pathetic loser, she spat, stepping forward and kicking his leg with the toe of her designer heel. You told me you were going to leave her and take half the empire. You told me you were a powerful angel investor. You are nothing but a broke, unemployed fraud who got caught stealing from his own wife. Marcus did not even look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on me, tears streaming down his face. Jordan, please, he pleaded again, his voice thick with snot and tears. Give me another chance. For the kids. Think about Maya and Trey. They need their father. Do not dare bring them into this, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I stood up, towering over him. The public spectacle was complete. The final blow had been dealt. Now it was time to close the chapter entirely. You lost the right to use our children as leverage the moment you stole their future, I said, slicing through the silence. You will not see Maya or Trey until the family court establishes a formal supervised visitation schedule. Given the federal investigation, I doubt a judge will grant access soon. Marcus scrambled up, sweating. He grabbed the envelope containing the eviction notice, his hands shaking. Jordan, listen to me, he stammered. You cannot legally enforce a 24-hour eviction. Georgia law requires a 30-day notice. I know my rights. I am not leaving tomorrow. I will call the police. I smiled at his desperate attempt to play lawyer. You are right, Marcus, I agreed, smoothing a wrinkle from my skirt. Under normal circumstances, a standard eviction requires a 30-day notice. But these are not normal circumstances, and you are no longer dealing with standard family law. I reached into my tote bag one final time. I did not pull out another envelope. Instead, I pulled out a thick bound legal document with a shiny gold court seal stamped on the front cover. I tossed it onto the table next to his empty wine glass. That is an emergency ex parte protective order, I explained, watching his eyes widen as he stared at the bright gold seal. It was signed by a superior court judge in Fulton County at 9 o'clock this morning. My legal team presented the judge with the forensic accounting report proving your massive embezzlement. Because you used the marital home as the registered business address for your fraudulent shell companies, the judge granted me immediate and exclusive possession of the property to prevent any further destruction of evidence or dissipation of marital assets. Marcus stared at the court order as if it were a loaded weapon pointed directly at his chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The 30-day residency rule does not apply when you are actively running a criminal enterprise out of the guest bedroom, I continued, my voice relentlessly calm. The order legally bars you from coming within 500 feet of the Buckhead estate, my corporate offices, or the children's private school. If you attempt to stop the moving crew tomorrow, or if you even step foot on the driveway, the local police will arrest you for violating a direct court order. You will go straight to the county jail. He was completely trapped. Every single avenue of escape, every possible legal loophole had been meticulously sealed shut before he even knew we were playing a game. And just to be entirely clear about the logistical arrangements, I added, checking my expensive watch. I have already contacted the resort management. Your name has been removed from the master account. The credit card you used to book your return flight to Atlanta has been frozen. You have exactly 1 hour to collect your personal belongings from the suite upstairs before your keycard is permanently deactivated. You are leaving me stranded in Massachusetts, he gasped, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. How am I supposed to get back to Atlanta? I do not have any money for a ticket. That sounds like a personal logistical challenge, Marcus, I replied, completely unfazed by his manufactured distress. Perhaps your new business partner can assist you. I gestured toward Chloe, who had been standing frozen in horrified silence, watching the man she thought was a millionaire get stripped of his very last shred of dignity. Chloe immediately took a massive step backward, holding both hands up in the air defensively. Oh no, she said, her voice high-pitched and incredibly frantic. Do not look at me. My credit cards are completely maxed out. I cannot buy him a plane ticket. I do not even know how I am going to pay my own rent next month now that you fired me from the agency. She glared at Marcus, her eyes filled with absolute venom. You lied to me, you broke, pathetic loser. You ruined my life completely. I am flying back to Atlanta alone tonight, and if you ever contact me again, I will file a restraining order against you myself. Chloe spun around on her designer heels and marched off the terrace, leaving her boutique shopping bag sitting completely abandoned on the wooden deck. Marcus reached out a trembling hand toward her, but she did not even look back once. The ultimate prize he had thrown his entire family away for was sprinting toward the exit the very moment the money dried up. My phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the glowing screen. It was a brief text message from David. It read, "We are packed. We are leaving for the airport right now. Sarah will have her keys mailed to your office by tomorrow morning. I am filing for divorce on Monday. I am so incredibly sorry, Jordan." I locked the screen and slid the phone back into my pocket. The purge was officially complete. Sarah was losing her marriage and her free luxury townhouse. Marcus was losing his wife, his children, his home, and his freedom. I turned my attention back to Marcus, who was now standing completely alone on the terrace, shivering despite the warm ocean breeze. He looked like an empty hollow shell of the arrogant man who had demanded my empire less than an hour ago. "Your hour is officially ticking, Marcus," I reminded him softly, picking up my designer tote bag. "I suggest you start packing your bags. The resort security team is not known for their patience with trespassers." I turned my back on him. I did not wait for a single word of response. I walked to where Trey and Maya waited. They looked at me with total trust. It was time to leave this broken man behind and focus on our bright future. I walked to where Trey and Maya waited. They looked at me with total trust. It was time to leave this broken man behind and focus on our bright future. We stepped off the private terrace and made our way down the beautifully lit stone path toward the main resort building. The air was warm and smelled of expensive jasmine and sea salt. Maya held my left hand tightly, and Trey walked closely on my right. Neither of them spoke a word about the man we had just left crying on the wooden deck. They possessed a quiet strength that made me incredibly proud. We approached the massive glass doors of the luxurious main lobby. The interior was a masterpiece of coastal elegance featuring towering marble columns and massive crystal chandeliers. But the usual serene atmosphere of the elite hotel was entirely disrupted. As we walked through the sliding doors, I immediately heard a sharp, familiar voice echoing across the cavernous space. It was Chloe. She was standing at the mahogany concierge desk, aggressively waving her phone at a terrified-looking hotel employee. Her designer sunglasses were pushed back onto her messy blonde hair, and her flawless makeup was completely ruined by her tears of rage. She was screaming about a canceled flight and a frozen corporate credit card. Several wealthy guests in evening wear had stopped in their tracks to watch the incredibly trashy spectacle unfold in the center of their exclusive vacation sanctuary. I guided my children toward a quiet seating area near the grand staircase, keeping us entirely out of the direct line of sight but maintaining a perfect view of the concierge desk. I wanted to see the final act of this pathetic tragedy play out. "I need a car to the airport right now," Chloe demanded, slamming her manicured hand on the polished mahogany. "You do not understand. I have to leave this island tonight." The concierge, a young man in a crisp uniform, looked completely overwhelmed. "I apologize, Mum," he stammered nervously, "but the credit card on file has been declined. The master account was closed by the primary account holder. I cannot arrange private transportation without a valid form of payment." Chloe let out a sound of pure frustration. She began frantically tapping her phone screen, trying to access any account that might still have funds. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open again. Marcus stumbled inside. He was panting heavily, his expensive linen shirt soaked in sweat and completely untucked. He looked like a madman. He frantically scanned the lobby until his bloodshot eyes locked onto Chloe standing at the desk. "Chloe," he called out, his voice desperate and incredibly weak. "Please wait. We need to talk. We need to figure this out together." Chloe spun around. If looks could cause physical harm, Marcus would have dropped dead on the pristine marble floor. She marched right up to him, closing the distance between them. "Figure this out together," she repeated, her voice a lethal, venomous hiss that carried across the entire lobby. "There is no together, Marcus. You are a complete fraud. You lied to me for 6 months. You told me you were a wealthy investor. You told me you were going to buy me a penthouse. Marcus reached out, trying to grab her hands. I am going to fix this, he pleaded, ignoring the dozen pairs of wealthy eyes staring directly at him. I just need time. My lawyer can fight the prenup. We can still start the agency. I just need you to trust me. Trust you! Chloe shrieked, slapping his hands away violently. You do not even have a job. You do not even have a house. Your wife just kicked you out onto the street and fired me from my own career. You used stolen money to buy me things, and now the federal government is going to investigate me because you are a pathetic, broke criminal. Marcus shrank back as if she had physically struck him. The murmurs began rippling through the crowded lobby. The word criminal floated through the air, mingling with the soft piano music playing in the background. The elite guests whispered behind their hands, completely captivated by the dramatic downfall of a man who had strutted through these very doors, acting like he owned the entire island just a few hours earlier. I loved you, Marcus whispered, a final desperate attempt to manipulate her emotions. You loved my youth and my body. Chloe shot back, her voice ringing with absolute disgust. And I loved your money. But you do not actually have any money, do you? You are just a parasite who lived off his brilliant wife and then tried to steal from her because you felt small. Well, you are small, Marcus. You are the smallest, most pathetic man I have ever met. I'm blocking your number, and if you ever try to contact me again, I am calling the police myself. She turned her back on him completely. She grabbed her heavy suitcase from the bellhop and began storming toward the main entrance, determined to find a taxi or beg for a ride. She did not look back. Marcus stood entirely frozen in the center of the grand lobby. He was completely alone. His sister-in-law had abandoned him. His mistress had publicly humiliated and dumped him. His wife had legally destroyed him. The wealthy guests continued to stare, their eyes filled with severe judgment and profound pity. I watched him stand there, letting the absolute finality of his ruin settle over him. He gambled our family on a fantasy. Now he had nothing but shame. I placed my hands on my children's shoulders. Let us go pack our things, I said softly. We have an early flight back to our home. We walked right past Marcus without stopping once. He was completely and utterly defeated. The massive empire he tried to steal was safe. We walked out of the opulent lobby, leaving Marcus completely isolated in the center of the marble floor. The crisp night air felt incredibly refreshing after the stifling tension of the cabana. My phone vibrated again, just as the valet brought my rented SUV around to the front drive. I glanced at the screen, expecting another frantic text from Sarah, but it was a notification from my head of corporate security back in Atlanta. The message was brief and professional. It simply read, "Local authorities have been briefed and are currently en route to the resort to secure the suspect pending formal extradition paperwork." I smiled a small, genuine smile as I helped Maya into the back seat and buckled her seatbelt. Trey climbed in next to her, his expression still serious, but visibly lighter than it had been all evening. "You handled that perfectly, Mom," he said quietly as I closed his door. "I appreciate that, Trey," I replied. "Never let anyone make you feel small in your own life." I walked around to the driver's side and slid behind the wheel. As I pulled the SUV away from the grand entrance, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of two local police cruisers turning onto the long, winding driveway of the resort. They were moving quickly, bypassing the valet stand and pulling directly up to the main doors. The timing was absolutely impeccable. I had authorized my security director to contact law enforcement the moment the protective order was signed that morning, but dealing with cross-state jurisdiction always required a delicate touch. They needed to ensure Marcus did not flee the island before they could serve him with the preliminary injunctions related to the federal wire fraud charges. I drove past the cruisers, offering a polite nod to the uniformed officers stepping out of their vehicles. They were heading inside to find a man who had absolutely no money, no resources, and no allies left to help him. The drive to the small regional airport was quiet and peaceful. The children fell asleep almost immediately, the emotional exhaustion of the evening finally catching up to them. I drove the winding coastal roads, feeling a profound sense of clarity. For 10 years, I had carried the immense weight of supporting a man who actively resented my success. I had constantly shrunk myself down, trying to make him feel larger. I had tolerated his passive-aggressive comments, his failed business ventures, and his constant need for validation, because I believed that was what a supportive wife was supposed to do. I had funded his entire existence, and in return he had used my money to finance his betrayal. But tonight I had finally set myself free. I had not just ended a toxic marriage, I had surgically dismantled a parasitic infection that was actively trying to drain my resources. The embezzlement charges were just the beginning of Marcus's long, painful journey through the justice system. The forensic accounting report I had compiled was airtight. Every single dollar he had stolen was meticulously tracked through the shell companies and directly into Chloe's accounts. Federal prosecutors love paper trails, especially when they are handed over by a highly cooperative corporate entity with a pristine reputation. Marcus was going to face a minimum of 3 to 5 years in federal prison for the wire fraud alone. He would be forced to pay full restitution, which meant the luxury car and the apartment lease would be seized and liquidated to repay my firm. He would lose his golf club memberships, his expensive wardrobe, and whatever tiny shred of social standing he had managed to cling to over the years. He would become exactly what he always feared he was: a completely irrelevant broke middle-aged man with a criminal record. And Chloe, the vibrant young assistant who thought she had secured a wealthy benefactor, was about to learn a very harsh lesson about corporate ethics and federal accessory charges. When the investigators knocked on her door tomorrow morning, asking why $250,000 of stolen corporate funds had been funneled into her personal lifestyle, she would realize that youth and beauty offered absolutely zero protection against a federal indictment. She would be forced to hire a public defender she could not afford, and her promising career in public relations was permanently destroyed. No reputable agency in Atlanta would ever hire a woman who was actively involved in a major corporate embezzlement scandal involving her boss's husband. As I pulled the rented SUV into the private aviation terminal, the lights of my chartered jet were already shining brightly on the tarmac. The flight crew was waiting ready to take us home. I woke the children, gently guiding them out of the car and toward the waiting plane. They looked up at the massive aircraft, their sleepy faces filled with awe. They had flown private many times before, but tonight it felt entirely different. It felt like an escape pod carrying us away from a burning wreckage. We boarded the plane and settled into the plush leather seats. The flight attendant offered us warm towels and sparkling water. As the jet engines roared to life, I looked out the small oval window at the dark outline of the island, slowly disappearing below us. I thought about Sarah and David, frantically packing their bags in their luxurious hotel room, realizing they had to return to a life of crushing debt and impending eviction. I thought about Marcus sitting in the back of a police cruiser, desperately trying to explain how his brilliant plan had failed so spectacularly. I felt absolutely no remorse. I had protected my empire, and more importantly, I had protected my children. I leaned my head back against the soft leather, closing my eyes as the plane climbed higher into the night sky. The air felt lighter up here. The heavy, suffocating burden of the Carter family was finally gone. I was Jordan Carter, the founder and CEO of one of the most successful wealth management firms in the Southeast, and nobody was ever going to underestimate me again. 2 days later, back in Atlanta, the consequences of that night began to ripple rapidly through the rest of the Carter family, starting directly with Sarah. While I was comfortably sitting in my corner office reviewing new investment portfolios, Sarah was standing on the front porch of the Ansley Park townhouse, completely locked out of the life she thought she deserved. The property management company I hired had been incredibly efficient. By noon on Monday, the locks were entirely changed, and a formal eviction notice was taped securely to the heavy oak front door. Sarah stood on the manicured lawn, her designer luggage piled haphazardly around her feet. She had flown back from Massachusetts early that morning, hoping to beat David to the house and somehow talk him out of filing the divorce papers. But David was already gone. He had stopped by the townhouse just long enough to pack his own bags and leave a single manila envelope taped to her most expensive suitcase. Inside was a copy of the divorce petition and a brief note instructing her to contact his attorney for any future communication. He had completely severed all ties. I received a detailed report from my security team who had been monitoring the property to ensure a smooth transition. They watched as Sarah desperately banged on the heavy front door, screaming David's name until her voice grew entirely hoarse. Her dramatic display attracted the attention of several wealthy neighbors who stepped out onto their porches to watch the spectacle. The pristine image Sarah had spent years cultivating in that upscale neighborhood evaporated in a matter of minutes. She was no longer the elegant, supportive wife of a tech entrepreneur. She was just a frantic, evicted woman making a public scene on a Monday afternoon. But the true magnitude of her ruin did not fully register until the following Sunday. For years, Sarah had used her position in our prominent local church as a powerful social shield. The First Fellowship Sanctuary was the absolute epicenter of elite Black society in Atlanta, and Sarah loved nothing more than parading through the aisles in her expensive Sunday hats, acting as the chairwoman of the women's ministry. She falsely believed that her church connections would somehow protect her from the fallout of her massive betrayal. She assumed she could simply spin the narrative and paint me as the villain who callously destroyed her family. She severely underestimated how quickly the truth travels within our community, especially when federal investigations are involved. That Sunday morning, Sarah walked into the massive church lobby wearing her best floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat, completely determined to hold her head high. She spotted a group of women from her ministry committee chatting near the grand staircase. She painted a bright, fake smile across her face and walked toward them, ready to launch into a carefully rehearsed story about my sudden cruelty. "Hello, ladies," Sarah called out, her voice entirely too loud for the somber morning atmosphere. "It has been such a difficult week, but I am so incredibly blessed to be here with my sisters in faith." The group of women slowly turned to face her. There were no warm smiles or welcoming embraces. The silence that fell over the lobby was thick and completely suffocating. Sister Higgins, the formidable wife of the senior pastor, stepped forward. She was a woman who commanded absolute respect and possessed a zero-tolerance policy for foolishness within her congregation. "Sarah," Sister Higgins said, her voice dangerously calm and entirely devoid of its usual warmth. "We are highly surprised to see you here this morning." Sarah blinked, her fake smile faltering just a fraction. "I need the comfort of my church family, Sister Higgins," she replied, attempting to sound deeply wounded. "My marriage is going through a terrible trial right now. Jordan has been incredibly vindictive, and David is just confused." Sister Higgins raised a single perfectly arched eyebrow. "Do not attempt to stand in the house of the Lord and lie to my face, Sarah," she commanded, her tone cutting through the lobby like a sharp blade. "We know exactly what you did. David visited the pastor on Thursday evening, seeking spiritual guidance regarding his divorce. He showed us the printed messages. The blood completely drained from Sarah's face. Her entire body went rigid. You actively encouraged your brother-in-law to commit adultery." Sister Higgins continued, her voice rising just enough so the surrounding congregation could hear every single word. "You helped him hide a profoundly sinful affair, and you conspired to steal money from his hard-working wife so you could secure a financial payout for yourself. You brought deceit and financial fraud into your own family." "I was just trying to help David," Sarah stammered, taking a desperate step backward. Her hands were shaking violently. "We were struggling financially. I made a terrible mistake, but I am seeking forgiveness." "Forgiveness comes from God," Sister Higgins replied coldly. "But leadership in this church requires integrity. You are officially relieved of your duties as the chairwoman of the women's ministry. We cannot have a woman who plots the destruction of another woman's marriage leading our congregation. I strongly suggest you find another place to worship, Sarah. Your presence here is highly disruptive and deeply hypocritical." Sarah looked around the lobby, pleading silently with the other women she had called her close friends just a week prior. None of them met her eyes. They turned their backs to her, completely shutting her out of the social circle she had sacrificed her entire family to impress. The rejection was absolute and devastating. Without another word, Sarah turned and fled from the church lobby. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and ran down the wide concrete steps, her expensive hat flying off her head and landing in the dirt. She did not bother to pick it up. She had absolutely nowhere to go. She was entirely exiled from her home, her marriage, and her community. She had gambled her entire existence on the pathetic greed of an incompetent man, and she had lost everything. While Sarah was experiencing the crushing reality of her complete social destruction, I was sitting in the sunlit dining room of my Buckhead estate, enjoying a quiet Sunday breakfast with Maya and Trey. The house felt incredibly peaceful without Marcus' constant heavy presence. The air was finally clean. We were moving forward, building a life based on authentic respect and genuine love rather than toxic obligation. But the absolute final chapter of this saga had yet to be written. Because later that afternoon my phone rang and the caller ID displayed a number I never expected to see again. It was Marcus calling from a monitored line at the Fulton County Detention Center. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, letting the phone ring 3 times before I finally swiped to accept the call. The automated voice of the Fulton County Corrections System filled my quiet, sunlit dining room, informing me that I was receiving a collect call from an inmate. Press 1 to accept the recording, instructed coldly. I pressed the button on my glass screen and lifted the phone to my ear. Jordan. It is me, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking instantly. Please do not hang up the phone. Please just listen to me for 1 single minute. The background noise was a chaotic symphony of shouting voices, clanging heavy metal doors, and buzzing intercoms. It was the harsh, unmistakable sound of absolute rock bottom. I took a slow sip of my morning coffee, keeping my voice perfectly level and entirely devoid of emotion. You have exactly 1 minute, Marcus, I replied, staring out the window at my manicured lawn. Choose your words very carefully, because this phone call is currently being recorded by the strict federal authorities. He let out a loud, ragged sob. The sound was incredibly pathetic, echoing through the phone line like a wounded animal. I am in a temporary holding cell, Jordan, he cried, his voice thick with panic and despair. I have been wearing the exact same clothes for 2 straight days. They took my shoelaces and my leather belt. I have absolutely nothing in here. It is freezing cold and I am completely terrified. I did not offer a single word of sympathy. Actions have severe consequences, Marcus Befry stated simply. You committed federal wire fraud to impress a 26-year-old public relations assistant. This cold cell is the direct, unavoidable result of your own extreme financial arrogance today. I was wrong, he wailed, his voice rising in sheer panic. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. I was sick, Jordan. I was suffering from a terrible midlife crisis, and I let my deep insecurities completely blind me. Chloe meant absolutely nothing to me. She was just a stupid distraction. You are the only woman I have ever truly loved. You are my beautiful wife. We built an amazing life together. You cannot just leave me in this horrible place to rot. The audacity of his blatant manipulation was almost impressive despite his entirely pathetic current circumstances right now. He was sitting in a county jail cell facing several years in a federal prison, and he still thought he could charm his way out of the severe consequences by weaponizing our sacred marriage. We did not build a life together, Marcus. I corrected him sharply, my tone slicing through his fake tears. I built a highly successful life and you happily lived inside it until you ultimately decided my hard-earned money was better spent financing your cheap infidelity. Please, Jordan. He begged, his voice dropping to a desperate, frantic whisper. I will do absolutely anything you want today. I will go to intensive therapy every single day. I will sign whatever strict post-nuptial agreements your corporate lawyers want to draft. I will willingly check myself into a residential rehab facility for sex addiction. I will spend the rest of my entire life making this terrible mistake up to you. Just please call your elite legal team and tell them to completely drop the embezzlement charges. Tell the investigators it was a simple misunderstanding between spouses. You have the immense power to stop this nightmare right now. I have the power to stop it, but I lack the desire, I replied, taking another calm sip of my hot coffee. You maliciously stole from my innocent children, Marcus. You stole from the generational wealth I broke my back to secure for their bright futures. There is no simple misunderstanding to clarify here. Then do it for the kids, he pleaded, playing his final, most desperate manipulative card. Think about Maya and Trey. They desperately need their father, Jordan. You cannot let your own children grow up with their father sitting in a federal penitentiary. It will completely ruin their lives. Every time they have a school father-daughter dance event or a weekend baseball game, they will be the sad kids with the criminal dad. Do not punish our completely innocent children just because you are angry with me. Give me a second chance for their sake. My grip on the phone tightened, but my voice remained perfectly steady. Do not dare use my children as a convenient shield to protect yourself from federal prosecution, I warned him, my tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register. You did not care about Maya and Trey when you sat at that expensive dinner table in Massachusetts and arrogantly demanded the beachfront penthouse. That rightfully belonged to their private trust fund. You did not care about them when you wired $250,000 of their future inheritance to buy a luxury vehicle for a woman you had known for barely 6 months. I was not thinking clearly, he sobbed loudly into the receiver. I am a good father, Jordan. You are a deeply selfish man, I corrected him. A good father does not actively jeopardize his children's financial security to fund his own pathetic ego trip. And my resilient children will not be ruined by your permanent physical absence, Marcus. They will be entirely protected by it. They are currently sitting in their beautiful homes safe from your toxic greed. I will raise them to understand the absolute value of integrity and hard work. I will teach them exactly how to spot manipulative liars like you. Jordan, please, he cried, the desperation completely taking over. I have absolutely nobody else. Sarah and David will not accept my calls. My lawyer says I am looking at 5 years minimum if you do not cooperate. I cannot survive 5 years in federal prison. I am begging you for a second chance today. Your second chance was every single day of our 10-year marriage, Marcus, I replied, my voice as hard and cold as a flawless diamond. Every time I paid off another one of your foolish debts, every time I overlooked your profound laziness, every time I let you pretend to be the powerful head of the household while I carried the entire financial burden on my own shoulders. Those were your countless second chances. You exhausted my grace completely, and you repaid my incredible generosity by attempting to publicly humiliate me and steal my empire. He cried harder, the sound echoing terribly over the monitored county jail phone line. Jordan, please, you do not understand, he gasped, his breath hitching. I cannot breathe in this tiny cell. The food is disgusting and the guards treat me like absolute garbage. I am not a violent criminal. I am a respectable businessman who just made a minor accounting error. You know I do not belong in a place like this. Let me come home. Please just make a call and let me come back to my house. You are not coming home, Marcus, because you no longer have a home, I stated calmly, watching a pair of bright red cardinals land on the edge of my pristine stone birdbath outside the dining room window. The Buckhead estate is currently being completely rekeyed by a private security team, and your personal belongings are sitting in a highly secure temperature-controlled storage facility. My lawyers officially filed the divorce petition early this morning. Due to the active federal criminal investigation and the emergency protective order currently in place, you will only be allowed to communicate with me through my lead attorney. You are no longer my husband. You are just a pathetic defendant in a major federal fraud case. He let out a sharp, terrified whine. But what about the children? He begged, his voice cracking violently. What about Maya and Trey? You cannot just cut a father out of his children's lives. They need me. I am their biological father. The courts will give me joint custody when I get out. You cannot keep my own children away from me forever, Jordan. I know my rights as a parent in the state of Georgia. I set my coffee mug down on the polished mahogany table, letting the absolute silence stretch for a long moment before I delivered the final crushing blow to his beautiful delusion. My children will never visit you in a depressing prison visitation room, I promised him, my tone vibrating with absolute lethal authority. They will not speak to you through a thick pane of smudged bulletproof glass, while a corrections officer listens in. I have already arranged for them to begin intensive private therapy with a top-tier child psychologist here in Atlanta. They will learn exactly how to process your profound betrayal, and they will move forward with their bright, successful lives entirely without you. You are officially erased from our daily existence. When you finally get out, Marcus Maya will be a teenager, and Trey will be actively preparing for college. I continued painting the bleak reality of his future with meticulous precision. And when you walk out of those heavy prison gates, you will be a convicted felon with absolutely zero liquid assets and millions of dollars in court-ordered restitution debt. Family court judges do not grant joint physical custody to completely destitute felons who stole their own children's irrevocable trust funds to buy luxury vehicles for their young mistresses. You permanently forfeited your parental rights the exact moment you decided to defraud your own family. Marcus began hyperventilating on the phone. The harsh, ragged sound of his panic filled the quiet dining room. "Please, Jordan," he gasped, struggling to pull air into his lungs. "What am I supposed to do now? I have absolutely no lawyer. I cannot afford the massive retainer fees they are asking for." The overworked public defender told me I should just plead guilty immediately and beg the federal judge for a reduced sentence. "I need your financial help to fight this case. Just pay for a good defense attorney. I will pay you back every single penny, I swear on my life. I will work multiple jobs to repay you." "You want me to use my hard-earned money to hire an elite criminal defense attorney to defend the man who actively stole from me?" I asked, letting a dry, humorless laugh escape my lips. "That is the most incredibly delusional request you have made so far, Marcus. You used my corporate funds to fund your midlife crisis, and now you want to use my personal funds to save you from the severe consequences. You can use the services of the public defender generously provided by the state. I highly suggest you take their legal advice and plead guilty. It will save the federal prosecutors a significant amount of time, and it will keep my pristine wealth management firm entirely out of the messy media spotlight." "Jordan, please!" he screamed, the sheer terror finally breaking his voice into a million jagged pieces. "Do not do this to me. I have absolutely nobody else in the entire world. Sarah and David will not even accept my collect calls. My so-called friends at the country club blocked my number. Chloe dumped me in the hotel lobby in front of everyone. You are the only person I have left. I love you. Please, I am begging you to save my life." "This is the very last time you will ever hear my voice, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a final, devastatingly cold whisper. "I am drawing an absolute iron boundary today. I am blocking this detention center phone number immediately after we disconnect. Do not attempt to send me pathetic handwritten letters from your jail cell. Do not ask your brother to pass along any desperate messages because he wants absolutely nothing to do with you either. You made your incredibly arrogant choices, and now you get to live with the consequences every single day for the rest of your ruined life. You are completely dead to me." "No, Jordan! Wait, please do not hang up!" he shrieked, his voice echoing wildly through the county jail block. "I love you, please. I am sorry." I reached out and firmly pressed the red button on my glowing smartphone screen, instantly cutting off his pathetic screams and plunging my beautiful dining room back into absolute perfect silence. The heavy iron boundary was officially drawn. The toxic infection was permanently severed from our lives. I picked up my coffee mug and took a long, slow sip, feeling the warm liquid soothe my throat. I had secured my empire, I had protected my children, and I had executed the most flawless, sweet revenge imaginable. I set my coffee mug down on the polished mahogany table and took a deep, cleansing breath. The morning sun was pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my Buckhead estate, casting a warm, golden glow across the immaculate hardwood floors. Outside, my private driver was already pulling the black luxury SUV around to the front portico, waiting patiently to take Maya and Trey to their exclusive preparatory school. I walked into the grand foyer where my beautiful children were putting on their navy blue blazers and grabbing their heavy backpacks. They looked incredibly happy. They looked entirely undisturbed by the massive storm that had just swept through our family tree and aggressively pruned the dead weight. I helped Maya adjust her white collar and gave Trey a quick, reassuring hug. As we walked out the heavy oak front doors and climbed into the plush leather seats of the waiting car, I felt an overwhelming sense of profound, absolute peace. The heavy iron security gates of our estate slowly opened, and the SUV glided smoothly onto the quiet tree-lined street. We were leaving the toxic wreckage of Marcus and Sarah entirely behind us. They were no longer main characters in our daily story. They were just pathetic cautionary tales of greed. As I watched the beautiful historic neighborhoods of Atlanta roll past my tinted window, I thought deeply about the sheer incredible audacity of what Marcus had tried to do. He had completely mistaken my quiet dedication for weakness. He had looked at a woman who navigated shark-infested corporate waters every single day and somehow convinced himself that he was the apex predator. He and Sarah honestly thought they could orchestrate a clumsy, desperate heist against an empire that was meticulously fortified with ironclad legal contracts and elite financial auditors. They tried to play a high-stakes game of chess without even understanding how the basic pieces moved on the board, and they lost absolutely everything in the process. Marcus was sitting in a freezing jail cell facing years in a federal penitentiary, and Sarah was a social outcast with no home and a pending divorce. But this entire ordeal was never just about a failed marriage or a pathetic midlife crisis. This was about something much larger and far more important. It was about the sacred concept of Black generational wealth. For centuries, our ancestors were systematically denied the fundamental right to own property, to build profitable businesses, and to pass down financial security to their children. They worked until their hands bled for absolutely nothing in return. I carry that heavy history deep in my bones every single day. Every single dollar I earned, every investment portfolio I managed, and every piece of commercial real estate I acquired was a deliberate act of defiance against a system that was historically designed to keep us entirely at the bottom. I built my massive empire to ensure that my children and my children's children would never know the bitter taste of financial subjugation. I created those untouchable, irrevocable trust funds so Maya and Trey could walk into any room in this country with their heads held high, completely unburdened by debt or financial desperation. So when a deeply insecure man decided he wanted to steal that hard-earned legacy and hand it over to a 26-year-old public relations assistant, he was not just betraying his wedding vows. He was actively attempting to rob his own bloodline. He was disrespecting the incredible sacrifices of the generations that came before us. That is exactly why I did not cry at that dinner table in Massachusetts. That is exactly why I did not scream or throw expensive plates or beg him to stay with me. I simply went to war using the most sophisticated modern weapons at my disposal. I used forensic accounting, legal strategy, and absolute emotional detachment. I outsmarted the enemy by letting him believe he was winning right up until the exact moment I dropped the heavy guillotine. There is an incredible, undeniable power in remaining completely silent while your enemies aggressively dig their own graves. Too many women are socially conditioned to react emotionally when they are profoundly betrayed by the men they love. We are expected to fight endlessly for toxic relationships that are actively destroying our inner peace. We are told to compromise our strict boundaries to preserve the fragile egos of men who absolutely refuse to rise to our high level. But true power comes from realizing that your self-worth is never negotiable under any circumstances. Your financial security is not a casual bargaining chip, and your peace of mind is entirely too expensive to waste on people who do not deeply value your presence. If you are watching this video right now, and you are dealing with people who constantly underestimate your intelligence or try to minimize your massive accomplishments, please listen to me very carefully. Do not ever shrink yourself to make someone else feel more comfortable in your presence. Do not apologize for your incredible success. If you are the primary breadwinner, If you are the brilliant architect of your family's strong foundation, wear that crown with absolute, unapologetic pride. And if anyone ever dares to threaten the beautiful empire you built, do not hesitate for 1 second to show them exactly what happens when they cross the absolute wrong woman. My name is Jordan Carter, and my story is a living testament to the absolute power of a woman who knows her true value in this world. I walked directly through the intense fire of betrayal, and I came out on the other side completely unburned, holding the heavy keys to my own kingdom. The greedy people who tried to destroy my life are currently locked in miserable cages of their own making, whether those cages are made of cold iron bars or crushing financial debt. Meanwhile, I am riding in a luxury car with my beautiful children, heading toward a future that is entirely, incredibly bright and completely free. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If this story resonated with your spirit, if you truly believe in aggressively protecting your peace and securing your absolute financial independence, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Share this video with any woman who desperately needs a powerful reminder that she is the undisputed brilliant CEO of her own life. Leave a comment below and let me know exactly how you have established firm, ironclad boundaries against toxic, manipulative people in your own world. Until next time, stay strong, stay incredibly focused, and never ever let them mistake your profound kindness for weakness. The story of Jordan Carter provides a brilliant masterclass in handling profound betrayal. But the single most striking lesson isn't merely about financial literacy. It is about the absolute power of strategic silence over emotional reaction. Society often conditions women to react loudly to heartbreak, to fight desperately for toxic relationships, or to minimize their own incredible success just to protect a fragile partner's ego. Jordan flips this destructive narrative entirely. When confronted with Marcus's infidelity and his sheer entitlement, she did not scream, beg, or negotiate her self-worth. Instead, she recognized that her peace of mind and her family's generational wealth were absolutely non-negotiable. By maintaining her chilling composure, she allowed her enemies' extreme arrogance to become their own complete undoing. She used logic, ironclad boundaries, and meticulous preparation as her ultimate weapons, proving that you do not need to engage in the emotional chaos to win the war. This approach teaches us a profound, life-altering truth. We are never obligated to participate in the drama that toxic people invite us to. When someone actively disrespects your value, your energy is infinitely better spent protecting your empire. Whether that empire is a multi-million-dollar corporate business, a safe home for your children, or simply your own mental health, Jordan's ultimate triumph reminds us that standing firmly in our power often means walking away in absolute silence while holding the keys to our own kingdom. We must stop apologizing for our success, recognize our inherent value, and start building unbreakable fortresses around our futures. Take a moment today to evaluate your personal boundaries and permanently cut off any toxic energy that is actively trying to drain your hard-earned peace.